Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. We had this morning sections talking about knowledge and technologies this morning, and we glad that we moved to second sections. We have a panelist here with me, and we're gonna talk about WaSH topic and have some stimulation discussions. Before we go into the question and Q&A, I would like to introduce about Institute of Molecular Science and Engineering. It's one of a kind of institute at Imperial College London. We are looking at the global challenges that is difficult to proceed and solve it. And we welcome all kind of people from different background, and we think about the out of the box and then deliver a good potential solutions and cooperate together. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Henry Po-Heng. I'm a senior lecturer in the Wastewater Engineering at the Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering departments at Imperial College London. I'm working on molecular level. I'm working on the genomic network. I'm working on quantum mechanics about bacteria, bugs, how they do gene regulations. So that applications go for treating wastewater into energy, or look at the hygiene or human health, something like that. So without further ado, I would have the gentleman right here to introduce himself. Yeah, please.
Well, thank you, Henry, and thank you all for having me along here to join your conference. My name is Hugh Bailey. I'm one of 3 commissioners of the UK's watchdog over government foreign aid spending. And each of us as commissioners writes 3 or 4 reviews a year, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of UK aid programming, and we deliver our reports to Parliament to give us the independence to criticise government where we think criticism is due. And in fact, I'm here almost under false pretenses, because the person who wrote and led recent piece of work on WaSH, Tamsin Barton, our Chief Commissioner, is unfortunately elsewhere today, but you said you would have me along, and I can talk a little bit about her work. Before I took up this job, I was an MP for a long time, a Labour MP, a minister in the Blair government. But in my present role, I'm a civil servant, and I'm supposed to do my very best to appear politically neutral.
Okay, Claire, please.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thanks for being here. I'm Claire. I did my undergrad and PhD at Imperial, and since then I started a company doing water quality monitoring. It's called OnTap, and what we essentially have built is an automated sensor that quantifies how many viruses or viral bacterial quantities in any water body. We're currently doing sewage monitoring for COVID, norovirus, and flu in communities such as care homes, and expanding that into other places for other viruses such as polio, etc., which is unfortunately something we are seeing more and more of at the moment. And also looking at bacteria in the future, so potentially monitoring E. coli, salmonella, etc. And we're starting in the UK because it's where we're based, but hoping to expand out into other countries such as India and some countries in Africa in the next few months.
Thank you, Claire. Anna, please.
Thank you, Henry. Hello, my name is Anna Meach. I'm a reader in water systems integration and director of the Center for Systems Engineering Innovation. And I'm based in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, as like Henry. And my expertise is in integrated water management. And we are interested specifically from the perspective of the long-term planning. So how we go from where we are now to design options for different aspects of water management on the water resources side, on the wastewater side, on the catchment side, on the agricultural side, having in mind that there are lots of pressures on the water systems, but also lots of uncertainty around the future. We do that using models. So I'm a modeler, and my team are doing modeling, but we very much appreciate good data, and we also see the very big role of technology, which I think we'll be discussing later on. And maybe my final point for the introduction is what I wasn't doing 5 years ago is to do both at the flow and the water quality. My work primarily was on just quantity, but definitely without the information and knowledge around the water quality, I don't think we can make any decision around even the thing as water resources, and definitely not about the integrated water management, and then link with other aspects such as health and biodiversity. So looking forward to the chat.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Andre. My name is Mala Rao. I'm a senior clinical fellow at the Department of Primary Care and Public Health, School of Public Health at Imperial College London. I'm also wearing my WaterAid UK hat today because I'm vice chair of WaterAid as well. I'm a rather, I suppose, an unconventional academic because I started as a public health physician working as a director of public health and health authorities, then progressed to head of public health workforce for England, and was sent as inaugural director of the first Indian Institute of Public Health under the aegis of the UK Global Health Strategy in the early noughties to set up that institute, because I always had a foot in academia and a foot in practice or policy. And that was when I first, I suppose, began to question the whole area of WaSH and WaSH scarcity and so on and so forth when I was in India. It was a very practical institute that I was setting up. We wanted to marry up that practice, policy and research and academia. I've been interested in climate change since the IPCC was first set up in 1988, and I've been following through. And my current work resides on that sort of intersection of climate, gender, and race and ethnicity, and how that then impacts on public health. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you. Thank you for all the panelists. Yeah, I think they are really elite of the colleagues and make my job easier. So I gotta go through then the tough questions. Okay, the first one is, why is the provision of a clean water still unsolved challenges? And what is the bottleneck in solving these social problems?
I hope I don't have to go from every question. I agree with everybody else. The fundamental problem is a problem of global inequality and lack of resource, and it's being aggravated by climate change and certainly by COVID as well. I looked up the UN figures just before I came this morning. 74% of the global population, only 74% currently have access to clean water, and if in order to meet the UN SDG 6, to ensure that there is universal access to clean water, sanitation and hygiene, the current rate of spend would need to quadruple between now and 2030, the date that we're supposed to meet the SDGs. So globally, global community is way off track. And I may say more about this later, but if I was to signal one thing more than anything else, which means that the targets are not being met, it's sustainability. I can talk more about that later, but we certainly in our recent study had a lot of, and in a previous one 5 years before, a lot of evidence that the UK, our role is to look at UK investment. I mean, that's why I mentioned the UK particularly, that a large proportion of the projects the UK was funding worked for a time, but didn't work long term. But I can come back to that if there's interest in further questions.
So yeah, I think you has kind of defined inequality means there are some developed country or underdeveloped countries have that different kind of issue. Do we have any people who would like to address that here with us?
I was actually going to talk about how the UK's provision of clean water is still a challenge. Like I worked in the water sector before, and there's a crazy amount of water just being wasted in leaks in Britain. We don't seem to care. It's 50 to 80 litres per person per day. That's around 1 trillion litres per year. That's bonkers. Like, why are we okay with that? And I think the reason is we don't actually value clean water that much in the UK. And that's a societal problem, and I think has to be addressed. We've seen antibiotic resistance campaigns on the television, and everyone's aware of that, I hope. But water is just not seen as something that we should value. Why is that? I don't understand. It's the one thing you really, really need. No one at school learns about how sewage is treated, and no one at school learns how drinking water comes out of the tap. We just expect it every day. The toilet water goes away and clean water comes in. Maybe if we valued it and maybe even learned about it at school, we'd have a true understanding of what is happening, and we'd value it more, and we'd actually care about the leaks and potentially other countries as well, and see what their problems really are and their problems with sanitation. And it wouldn't be seen as an unsexy industry to go into. It's just not something that people grow up thinking they want to do. Not many kids grow up thinking, oh, I want to work in wastewater, I want to work in water treatment. So I just think that we need to really educate people what the value of clean water.
Maybe if I can pick on Claire's point, I think, I think the perspective around whatever we want to call them, developed and developing countries, is really interesting. I think for the developing, I think the problem and the bottleneck is really simple because we know how to do water supply and sanitation. So I would say money and just investing the money. So the solution is really simple in my head for the basic needs and providing the access. Of course, then the issue around equality does come in. So who do you provide access to, how do you provide it, and so on. But if we think about the basic needs, I think it's almost disgrace that we still have people who don't have access to clean water and sanitation, because it is really, we've been doing it as a society for a very long time now, very successfully. On the developing country side, I think the biggest challenge is, coming back to my first point, will be around actually the link between the flow and water quality, because there is water, of course. It changes with the climate change, the availability and the patterns. But I think the thing we are sometimes very often neglecting, especially on the water resources side, is the fact that we are polluting the water a lot. So there is huge development, huge pressures. We are currently treating lots of water, but that has its price. It's a chemical footprint, it's an energy footprint, which again goes back into the environment. So it's a very vicious cycle that we went into, considering that all our well-being is directly linked with the level of development, which again, I think, maybe not in the next 2 years but it will come back to us, and I think where we'll be struggling with the water resources in the developed world will be the constraint, not on the quantity, but on the quality side.
You want to add something?
I think I entirely agree with Sir Hugh in saying this is a massive global inequity issue, and I suppose I have nothing to add on the issue and the challenges faced by the developed world, because they have the capacity and the systems. Claire's absolutely right. Even so, they get it wrong, and so badly wrong. So, but they do have the capacity, and there is the governance, I suppose, and the accountability to ensure that things do start to change for the better. I think what concerns me much more is exactly as Anna said. All these years after we brought in piped water supplies into big cities like London and Amsterdam and so on, it is absolutely disgraceful to have 2 billion people in the global south who are without access to safely managed water, and 4 billion without access to sanitation. I mean, this is really, where did it begin? So if you go back and look at the root causes, you recognize that this is a power imbalance that dates back 400 years, and where many of the countries in the global north have had this very exploitative, extractive, I guess, framework within which our governance and global structures and systems have evolved. So we've got two problems now. Despite all of that, water does not feature in the G7 agenda. It simply isn't a priority. In war trade, how hard do we try to get it into the top priorities of the big nations who have the funding, are able to give the support, the policy assistance required to bring about transformational change. It isn't, because like others have said, it's seen as free, it's out there, and it's seen as a means to an end, but not an end in itself. So that could be one of the reasons there isn't the interest, and we must get it into that priority. And the second is, of course, the climate crisis. And it's only in semi-arid territories where human survival may not be possible, where you find maybe there's a physical water shortage. But in most of the rest of the places where most of the 2 billion live, it's exactly as Anna said, the water is so disgracefully polluted because of industrialization and urbanization and so on and so forth, that they just don't have access to it. And those are much more wicked problems linked with this power imbalance. And that's what's keeping us from progressing at the pace that we would all like to.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. We're talking about the waste of the drinking water, but also to look at the polluted water. And what does affordable mean in relationship to provide affordable sanitation and affordable clean water? I think the business model, like we just mentioned, might be important. So what is enough? What is insufficient? Is anyone who would like to look at this direction aspects?
I personally think that we don't, as I said, don't value it enough. And it's the real thing that we do need. It's cheaper than electricity here. It's the cheapest utility. Which again, it's so affordable in developed country. And yeah, here, it really is affordable. I think the bills should go up. We should be spending more on it, and the infrastructure should be changed. That's my personal opinion. But in other countries, obviously, that's a whole different kettle of fish, which I'll let you guys answer to.
Yeah, I think compared to energy, water is definitely cheaper.
Henry, your question reminds me of what happened when Cape Town began to run out of water. I mean, I don't know if there are any from South Africa here, any colleagues from South Africa. If you are here, please join in this conversation when your time comes, because, it was interesting. I think it was about 2017. And then that's when the whole world began to be conscious that they had restricted water, which included drinking water, cooking, and all the rest, to about 50 litres per person. And then in Britain, people started to think, well, how much do I use? And I discovered that we are the most profligate, apparently. And we use about 165 litres a day or some such thing. And there was a little bit of introspection at that time, the world over, and people thought, oh my goodness, am I going to be next? And then the moment the rains came, and thankfully, a complete disaster where the water totally ran out, that was averted, we've all gone back to business as usual. So, and yet, there was a list of cities that are one by one going to run out of water. And this is going to happen in 3 or 4 years' time, not in 100 years, as climate predictions were, even 5 or 10 years ago. And we don't value this enough. We don't consider our use. There's a lot more we need to do in the way of educating people. And I think it needs to be part of normalized public health education to the population.
Yeah.
Maybe if I can add, I think this comes to the discussion of, for me, affordability comes to the question of basic needs versus indulgence. Of course, affordable for me means that everyone should have that access to the water, and everyone should have relatively cheap access to basic water needs. And there are calculations, and we know with what is the minimum amount of water, not minimum, but what is the relatively normal amount of water that we can get, we can use during the day to live very comfortably, okay? And then the second question comes, anything above that should be priced. The governments, well, possibly are very reluctant into introducing, variable pricing for water, but it's a very simple mechanism to incentivize less use of the water. People, I think what Mala mentioned is the perfect example of the human nature, and I think we must not forget the human nature, but people react to regulation because they have to. It's a very simple way. We had 5 Ps for the plastic bags. We stopped using plastic bags. So price, I think, is a very good incentive that we are not using at all, and I think there is a political agenda behind it possibly, but I think we are completely underestimating the educational element, that people, if they know how much water they use, what are the implications of that use, and how much they could actually help the water system in the environment with reducing their use, they would be willing to do that. Some of them, some would be incentivized through other ways. But thinking about the levels of the water need and how much we need, and then try to regulate it in different ways, I think is absolutely necessary, because water demand is basically the main driver around the whole, at least urban water system.
Sure. I all agree with those comments. But the thing is, I find out there's two kind of elements in terms of clean definition. For drinking water side and wastewater side. For drinking water, probably in developed country, they still relate to disease. But for like London here, we have pretty good water supply systems. As Claire just mentioned, like COVID-19, the viruses, they can transfer into the wastewater. And would that be another incubator for another variant? It's an issue. So I just want to check, what does clean means? How clean does clean have to be worth investigating? That might be an issue. Maybe Mala, can you look at the public health, that perspective? How you view those clean in your definition in terms of public health?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because if you go back into public health history, there was a time when there was this major discovery that actually water was a vehicle, a vector for transmitting disease, which killed people. And then at that time, before microscopes, we didn't actually know what it was about the water. And then, of course, we began to recognize it was microbes. And then fast forward to today, if you look at the joint monitoring program of WHO and UNICEF, I mean, it's the JMP that monitors our progress towards the SDG WaSH goals. And they still use fecal contamination as the key, measurement. And you can see why, because there's also that issue of needing to balance costs against benefit. And we're not even getting that right. I mean, here we are talking about 2 billion that don't even get that. And so there are other things we probably ought to be testing, but then let's at least get that to 100% of the world. And we've got arsenic and fluoride, which when warranted is part of the measurement. So in countries like Bangladesh and Nepal, you find very high levels. And so, even there, it's not a routine measurement, it's where it's needed. And then my concern, I have to say more recently, has been about microplastics. I don't know enough about this. I'm a medic, so I'm lay in that regard. And I've been wondering whether in this institute, there are some of you who are looking into how much in the way of microplastics we're consuming through our water, and now nanoplastics.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and How is that affecting human health? We don't really know. There are so many other contaminants, but where to begin? And thankfully, apparently they don't kill us outright because we're not, otherwise we'd all be dead. Somebody said that we almost consume a smart card equivalent of plastic probably every week. Now, I was very alarmed when I heard that at a WHO Southeast Asia regional office meeting. I don't know, is that the case? So how do we measure it? How do we normalize and routinize those measurements without making it unaffordable? Yeah. These are the questions that perhaps the Institute could answer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do we have something to add?
Yeah, just to add, on kind of for me, again, on that clean side, I think there is a very distinct, very, very big difference between, developing and developing countries. I think in the Western world, we are over-treating the water. And why I say that? Because we don't need to use the water at the drinking level of quality for quite a few applications. So there is, again, relatively simple solution, which basically means that you do different levels of treatment, which saves energy and chemicals and so on for different uses. Of course, it would require the redesign of the infrastructure system, which again brings us to money and engineering, but it's not impossible. It is quite maybe implementationally difficult, but it is a solution for some of the problems around clean water. So we have technologies for the recycling, reuse that all exist, but we are just not using it. I guess on the developing countries, the problem is actually the really high level of pollution and lack of any treatment technologies, and then impacts on health, which I think brings us to that initial point of implement any technology. It doesn't have to be something very advanced as maybe what we are maybe looking here, but I think also for the Global South, this is a really nice opportunity to learn from, not mistakes, but to learn from specific ways of designing infrastructure systems, very much kind of centralized ways, because Global South is already very decentralized. And we are trying to be decentralized. I think they have a huge opportunity, the countries in the Global South, to just skip one step and stay in that decentralized mode, but with adding the technology advancements, data, and so on, to really go much further in the sustainability than they would have done if they would just follow what has been done in West.
Yeah, so Mala covered the bioplastic as well, and Anna also talk about decentralized system. Those are different solutions, possibly, or question as well. And when we talk about clean, there's also about wastewater. Like we have one speaker this morning talking about antibiotics. This has been there for years, and nobody really addressed that issue. How does the resin genes transfer into pathogen? And then there's no pharmaceutical, can be cure the people. There's a lot of definition we need to address and to invest in, and it just not get too much attention. I remember one of the data showed that in the United States, about 50,000 people die because antibiotic resin genes is there in the pathogens. But there's data that's always there. So clean, do we need to get more parameter to invest clean? In that regard, and even like in Claire, you also develop those variances, right? But there's no regulation talking about criteria to meet that standard. What's your view in terms of your startup company, and then how difficult challenge you face?
Well, absolutely. There's no regulation to say we shouldn't have pharmaceuticals. So the problem is we take antibiotics and not all of it gets absorbed by the body. We excrete some of it, right? And then it goes to the wastewater treatment works, and not all of it gets removed. It ends up in the waterways. Fish often eat it, and then some of them are changing gender because they're eating a lot of these drugs, which not ideal, quite scary. And that's something that's not regulated against. Hopefully it will be. But there's no innovation happening to detect it, never mind remove it, because there's no regulation against it. Hopefully that will change as a watch list, as I'm sure many of you know, and we'll see hopefully that coming through. We're already getting requests for our technology to evolve to detect more things like microplastics and PFAS. We've been asked if we can detect those in waterways and got requests for devices around the world to do that, which is fascinating and great. We're really pleased about that. But we need to have enough pull to make the devices, right, to actually go and do that. So that's a very good sign, but we need regulation to force that to happen, or it's just not going to happen. I also wanted to follow on Anna's point that clean water means different things for different applications. We over-treat our water. Drinking water should not be the same water that we use for everything else. It doesn't make any sense at all. It should be applied appropriately and the correct cleanness. And the word clean shouldn't be it shouldn't be a term that we decide on and keep forever. We're always going to find new things that are harmful, unfortunately. We're always going to have to redefine that, and it should be an ever-changing term as we find new things out. And in different countries, it's different things, right? So Japan has different industrial effluents and worse ones. So they have a different definition of what clean is because they find different things than, for example, in Europe. So we need to just make sure it's relevant to the right place and keep asking, is that definition right still? I think.
Yeah, so Claire talked about, like in UK, what kind of water standard we should meet, and maybe different country. But I have a further questions. What is the role of the UK in delivering the clean water locally and globally? Can we contribute in terms of nationwide, but also help to other countries? Could you provide some political perspective?
Well, I can in terms of the UK's role globally. I think there are other people who are much better qualified to talk about the huge backlog of investment which there is in the sort of UK water system. My watchdog, the Independent Commission for Aid Impact, in 2016 commissioned a full review. We spent a year working on it, looking at UK programming in the WaSH sector. At the time, the UK was committed over a 4-year period to providing clean water, access to clean water and sanitation for 60 million people globally, which it met. In fact, it exceeded its target. And then it reinstated the target for the next 4 years and once again met the target. But our research raised serious questions about the sustainability. What the UK government was measuring was the provision of safe and clean drinking water, adequate sanitation at a point in time, and that point in time was when the project closed. And so we called on the government to review its programming, which it did. And in 2001, it produced a further 2021, produced a further report with the shocking figure that of programs which UK funding has supported in developing countries, just over half were still fully functioning at the time they did their survey. And as a consequence of that finding, the UK changed the direction of its programming from, to put it crudely, building infrastructure with partners in developing countries to working with the governments of developing countries to set up locally managed water and sanitation, hygiene partnerships. Now, a lot of people, NGOs, sort of accused the government of using this report as an excuse to reduce its funding. But this decision to move away from infrastructure was taken before COVID and before the large round of UK international development aid spending cuts. And the new substitute program, I have to say, of building partnerships for managing the rollout of clean water and sanitation is hugely behind the timetable because the funding which the UK government was proposing has not come through. In our more recent information note, which is a shorter, sharper piece of work to sort of take stock of progress that the UK government has made, or not, since the main report 2016, 7 years 7 years previously, we found that we found that the problem still remains, which is why I say this question of sustainability is absolutely key. The way I think you achieve sustainability is not by being a foreign donor who produces infrastructure from afar, even at a high technical standard, but if there's not buy-in from the community that's using it, it's likely to fail because maintenance and commitment and funding will not be generated locally. So I think, that for me is one important takeaway. And in terms, if I can just hark back quickly to the question about what do we mean by affordability, the overarching mantra for the UN Sustainable Development Goals is leave no one behind. And I agree very strongly with Anna on this. If you're affordable means different things to different people. And for some people for whom an adequate minimum supply of clean water at the prices that are available locally simply isn't affordable. And if you want universal supply, then you've got to provide that water for free or at a hugely subsidized cost to such people. And it's possible in a developed country like Britain to build in a social security system which can attempt. I used to be a social security, work and pensions minister, which seeks to provide people with adequate income to pay their water bills. But in least developed countries, that's not possible, and that's why local ownership, I think, is so important, so that the community that owns, in inverted commas, or may literally own the water infrastructure and the supply, would then need to identify those families who would have free access. Because I can't see any other way of making clean water universally available.
Thank you. So we have been addressed a lot of issue and our role on the UK part. Here we come with ourselves, IMSI as an institution. So what is the role of our, like us, research institute, university in a developed country in delivering the clean water globally? How would we as academia can help address those issues? Anna, you want to
I can start. So I've been working in India for many years, since 2012. We had 2 big projects, and I have really nice links and many colleagues in India. And I think from the perspective of, say, UK research institution, I think for me there are 2 key things. So the one is to be humble, in a sense to understand that the research that is done in lots of countries, including India and other countries, is an excellent research. And as much as they can learn from us, we can also learn from them. So I think there's a real need for really genuine knowledge exchange. So this is my first experience. The second is that I think we talked about the transferability, and Sir Hugh mentioned about the kind of local context, which I think is really important. I think it's very easy to think that we have solutions for everything without understanding the local context, because the physical system is different, the governance systems is different, the communities are different, the culture is different, the behavior is very different. And I think if we as researchers just go there, say in India, and try to say this is the best way how you should be doing things, it will never work. But equally, if we approach a situation from the perspective, this is what we know, this is what you know, this is the local context in which the problem needs to be solved, and working with the local universities, but also local organizations, I think this is the only way where proper knowledge transfer will happen. And I think just final point is that I think we should also try to learn from them, in a sense, coming back to a point around decentralization in the water management, we talked about the wastewater recycling, which is something that is currently, something that Thames Water is thinking about implementing in the next planning cycle. Bangalore already has 2 large wastewater recycling schemes that recycle up to 40% of their wastewater for the irrigation practices. So I think, we have to be really, humble and really work collaboratively to see what's the best solution in a given context.
So Mala, do you have any experience and want to comment on this?
Well, I have some thoughts and some suggestions for how engineering should take this forward, perhaps. And that comes from just comparing with something that's happened in medicine. Up to the 1990s, when members of the public or clinicians applied to a health authority, an NHS health authority in this country, for funding to offer a medicine or a particular form of drug treatment which was not the routine within the hospital formulary, then it was up to the health authority to then decide whether this was worth and had the value, both in terms of clinical and cost effectiveness, to be funded. And that job used to be given, the responsibility was usually that of the Director of Public Health. And I had a team of 6 people constantly doing reviews of all kinds of things, new cancer treatments being asked before we had actually licensed some products, but maybe they were in the US, so somebody wanted it in this country, or other kinds of treatments. But I felt we had a professional and an ethical responsibility to make sure that we were offering correct advice, because on the one hand, you didn't want to waste money. On the other, it might be that somebody's survival was enhanced by up to a year or 2 years if they had cancer. Now, you think about this in the pre-internet days, and then the government of 1997 decided what this has resulted in is a postcode lottery. Some are concluding that you needed it, some others are concluding you don't need it. Let us bring in the National Institute for Health and Clinical Care Excellence. Now, what that did was, nationally, it took away this individual responsibility and did a very careful review and assessment of each kind of drug treatment or technology, and started to put out guidelines, having looked at everything from cost to actual clinical value. And they brought, and so NICE now is used around the world. It's not just in Britain. It is a trusted source of guidance, both for the public and for doctors, because anybody can look up a particular treatment, or you can look up, cancer, am I getting the right treatment, that kind of thing. Now, what interests me is we don't have that equivalent for WaSH. And wearing my war trade hat now, I long for a time when engineering departments will get together and say, in this context, this is the right technology to be used. Reverse osmosis, how wasteful is that in terms of water? And yet, around the world, this is what's being offered. Most people look blank when I say to them, do you know how wasteful this is? Now, where is that? You have that information. You have that knowledge. Now, please let us lay in this context, have that share of information. So if you start putting out guidelines on, here's a situation where this would work in semi-arid countries, maybe it's something else elsewhere. I think you would do a huge public good where it brings together carbon footprints of technology, how many people might be helped, who doesn't waste water in the process of offering a little bit of safe drinking water, what else does it do? We need that information, and we're very hungry for it. And I think this would be something huge that you could do. There are other suggestions, but I'm going to let others speak because I've gone on and on.
Any other comments?
Just to say, if I was sort of trying to leave one thought with research-intensive universities, it would be do this on a multidisciplinary basis. You have brilliant engineers, you have brilliant public health physicians, and even if you take their advice, maybe it won't work in the field because you get the economics wrong, or the incentives wrong, you use the private sector in the wrong way, you don't get this sense of community ownership. It's a sort of north to south program rather than a program managed in the south, drawing on technical assistance and expertise. So if you just do the engineering right, it won't necessarily work. If you just do the financing right, as I explained with these two enormous UK aid, 200 million pound a year water aid programs, if you just get the funding right, it doesn't necessarily produce sustainable water. You've got to get the scientists, the social scientists, the economists, the private sector all to work together. Otherwise, will continue to be a high level of medium-term project failure.
I definitely want to do in IPSI. So I also, with that kind of comment, I also think about education is also really important. So we bring out pretty good people, we should be humble. We have a lot of great international students, like talent students come to these institutions, and we brainstorming, we learn each other, and we get a really good idea and how we can tackle a problem. I think that's really good kind of education, might be one key to bring up a good mindset and good people and working together. Okay, so with that, so then the UN Sustainable Development Goal 6 is to ensure access to water and sanitation for all. So we say all means that everybody, not wherever you're from developed country or developing countries. So when can you see this goal being a reality? Is anybody would like to have comment on that? Maybe Claire, you want to talk about that?
So I'm kind of this both biased and a pessimist, so just frame it before that. Never. Is that possible? 100% of the time, 100% of the places, it's just not possible. That's, just 100% unachievable. But the way to almost achieve it is better monitoring. Now, my company might do monitoring, hence the bias. But if we don't know that there's a problem, how are we meant to know to solve it? And so this monitoring piece, and the monitoring doesn't need to be spot monitoring where you take one sample a week, a month. However, it needs to be all the time. We need to know that the water is all the time fine. And we've seen that without monitoring outfalls in Britain, we've seen that the streams and rivers have had toilet paper in them and swimmers have had terrible times. It just needs better monitoring to be there at all times. We know when to treat it to even start achieving this goal. So that becomes a reality when proper investment is done into monitoring solutions.
So you say that monitoring the data is very important, right? So that's good. Even Anna, you want to comment that you are a data-driven scientist? You want to comment on how important data is?
Yeah, no, it's really important. I mean, because without the data, we don't have models. I think this is really important to understand because we use the data to trust the models to predict what is going to happen. So this is absolutely important. But I think if we are talking about, I think this is maybe more a kind of philosophical question in a sense, there is some goal, sustainable development goal, and we want it to be achieved globally, isn't it? Which I completely agree with Claire. I think SDGs are great because they exist and they bring the attention to really important aspects. I think the biggest barrier for me is very much political question and the question of agreement and coordination at the global scale, which, unless there is some big crisis, will never happen. I think the only times in history when we see people agreeing was after situations like COVID, like Second World War, and so on. And unfortunately, what might happen is that the climate change will induce that kind of crisis. The problem is it will never have the same impact in all the countries at the same time. So unfortunately, we won't be, I don't see everyone being alerted at such a level that people really start caring about water and investing in water. So I think if one thing I would wish to happen is that by some miracle, the government say, the same way as carbon, water is really our priority. I really don't understand why we talk about the net zero carbon and we don't talk about net zero water. Because, water is a basic need. We can live with limited amount of energy. We can't live without water. So, and from the perspective of the level of change, regulation and policy and the narrative change and the focus could kind of induce lots of other things to happen. I think everything else on the smaller scale, data, behavior change, food change, technology and so on, will be shifting the system slightly, but it won't be a big change that I really deeply believe we need if we want to take the SDG 6 very seriously and at the global scale. So yeah, I may write an email to all the prime ministers, but yeah, it's
one here.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I really think this is now a global crisis where the governments need to take the responsibility and take the courage to say this needs to be addressed, and everyone plays the role, and everyone needs to be part of the solution. So that would be my wishful thinking.
Yes, that's really good comment and very good answer. For me, at least, quite get inspiration. I'm run out of my questions. So now we are actually open to the audience. Would you like to ask any questions, any maybe also comments on that? We have a quite good expert here.
Can I address something Marla said about the institute?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sure. Okay, guys, hi. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Steph Pendlebury. I'm the Institute Manager for IMSI, this institute. Marla raised a point about microplastics in water and that's a big issue. It is a big issue, definitely. We are currently working on a briefing paper. There is a cross-college team of people from various different departments, including, I think, civil engineering, life sciences,
yeah,
chemistry.
I'm part of it as well.
Yes, Henry's part of it, yeah. Looking at, we refer to it as the sludge paper, but it's the microplastics in wastewater paper, and looking at various molecular science and engineering ways of addressing that challenge, which Henry might want to say something about briefly before we then open up, because I definitely saw one question over there.
Sure.
So I'll start moving that way.
We're looking at all the transformation of bioplastics from water, even air. So we have a colleague look at air part, how people can suck into the bioplastic, how they relate to public health as well, and how you transfer into the soil, and soil going to animal, and you're eating the animal as well. So it's just a big issue on that. So we look at the whole cycle of the bioplastic. For currently, we only find out it doesn't degrade, it's make it smaller. And when you get in very smaller, when you go into the lung, you might have some issue. So that is something we haven't really have a good idea what's going to deal with. All of our wastewater treatment plant or drinking water treatment plant, we just don't have that capacity to do it. So it's another issue we haven't really tackled down well. That's things.
Maybe if I could just quickly add on that before we move on, because there has been lots of work done at Imperial on the topic of generally emerging pollutants, which is something that we just don't know. So there are also two briefing papers that have been published. So one is on the role of the pesticides in urban systems, and the other one is on the issue of tire wear particles and impacts across the system. And we can share the links if people are interested in reading that.
It's more than just water, it's even hygiene and sanitation as well. Yeah, please. We have a question
Hi,
there.
good afternoon. Luisa comes from UCL. It's more a comment and question as well. It's been great in hearing all of you. I think I agree with most you have spoken. And during your talks, I was just thinking about how can we scale up water and sanitation at a global scale, right? And that remind me the problem that we had in this country. I was not here, I'm Brazilian, right? I migrated here in 2006, but I'm an alumnus from Imperial College. We are aware of the great stink here, right? That's famous. And the story I know is that it was because of the great stink that it was affecting the parliament that the problem was solved. So how can we learn from the great stink to make it more global solutions? And I was thinking perhaps that we governments from rich nations, they need to be more accountable. Everybody, all of us, industries, we need to take a responsibility for what we are doing. We are buying things, clothes, branded clothes, that they are made there, and we import them, and they are polluting the rivers, and we are silent. We are not doing anything. Children are getting disease. It's very sad. I've been working in a review that is under review. It's going to be coming soon about impact of chemicals in water in children under 5. It's shocking to see that there is a huge impact of chemicals, that it's very sad to see that it's still arsenic, fluoride, nitrates are still the main compounds, at least because we know, because it's what the researchers are doing, but we are aware of the invisible compounds that we are now struggling to detect them, that are the emerging compounds like PFAS, right, that we mentioned here, and the additives of microplastics or degradation products that we are not looking into those one yet. But poor countries, children are being suffering, are being affected because of these chemicals. And in those countries, there are lots of industries. So my question to yourselves, how can we be more accountable? The rich nations need to be more accountable. Should we boycott them like people are doing with Russia now, stopping buying from Russia? Should we not stop buying from those industries that are polluting? Perhaps we, rich countries, are putting the industry there, and because their law there is not coming from Brazil, I know how it works. So they don't have stringent legislation, so they let the pollution go, but we are buying from them. That's my only point, and I would like to hear your views. How can we take the great stink everywhere so that, the great stink is there, but it's not affecting the decision makers. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I agree with that point. Not only about closing. A few years ago, I also looked at caffeine. Henry K can supplement that for me. We drink a lot of coffee in this country, Western country, but we left a lot of caffeine in the wastewater. It's not degraded at all, and it's terrible that the water is so polluted there with a lot of caffeine as well. And we try to address that issue but it's just difficult to make it scale up, right? That is also. I don't know if you have any solution on that. Yeah, Mala, please.
This isn't so much a solution as just saying how much I agree and admire you for bringing this particular issue and sharing it with this, at this discussion. But the root cause of this is 400 years of, I don't like the word, but we use it certainly in medical education, colonization, and that is where I look at the intersection of ethnicity, global north, global south. Where does this begin? And it stems from that whole exploitative, extractive way that we think, and we believe that to be perfectly acceptable. But all these years later, look at the extent of the environmental degradation to the point that we have the shared position where we're all on the brink of environmental collapse, frankly. And so you're right, that accountability has to be there. But could we have a bit of accountability in our august institutions? Because, even this domination of what we call science and critical thinking and this binary way and very unidirectional way that we humans can extract from nature and take what we want out of it. I mean, that's been the way things are. So I love the fact that Anna talked about humility. Is this the time, we're doing this in medicine, Amali Loku Gamage is from UCL, so you might want to look up her work, but where we start to say, let's do something we've never thought of before, which is bring indigenous knowledge center stage, along with all of our, highly quantitative, highly evolved scientific thinking, as we recognize it not just in the Western world, but even in the global South. Everybody has one notion of what is correct, and that is the Western way of doing things. But do we need to elevate indigenous knowledge and start inviting them into these discussions, because these are not the people, they are the worst in terms of enduring impacts, even now, not 10 years into the future. Do they not have a say in climate-related discussions? Where are they? And do we need to start doing that at universities, being a bit more introspective and more I suppose, bold in how we change the way we think? I love the fact that, Sir Hugh talked about multidisciplinarity with social sciences and quantitative sciences all coming together. But do we need to go beyond that and look at being nomadic in our thinking? Those are the words my medical educator colleagues are using. And then at some point, I hope in this discussion, we also have the chance to talk about gender, because that's another big thing we haven't talked about, but which absolutely influences the way the world has evolved into this mess we're in.
Maybe if I could just make a quick comment. I think, you mentioned the big thing, which comes to the point around the catastrophe. So something really big needs to happen and then people react. This is a human nature. I think what we are not utilizing enough is the information that we have. We know how bad things are in lots of aspects. Are we communicating it enough? Are we simulating? We can simulate catastrophic scenarios. Would people react if you would see London and the flood displayed on the Piccadilly Square? I mean, I don't know, but I think there is a bit around the. It's not even in education. I think it's really the knowledge sharing and awareness that we are completely missing the trick there to get people to be excited about something and worried about something, and then maybe people will then choose the government who has the goals that address their worries, and then we get into some kind of positive cycle of change. I don't know. I think there is something there which we haven't explored to its maximum.
I think a couple of comments. Look, we haven't talked much about gender, and the solution to global WaSH problems cannot be solved unless you deal with gender up front. And 200 million hours a day are spent by women and girls collecting water in communities that don't have a safe water supply. So if you're spreading access to safe water, you're also empowering more girls to go to school and to engage in other things apart from the most routine manual labor. But your question used the word accountability, and I agree very strongly that you need accountability, but you need it everywhere. I've long argued that in every country where DFID, or now the FCDO, where British aid has a program, it should publish an annual report. And it should present the report to civil society, it should present it to the Parliament of the country, and it should listen to what people are saying about the programming, its strengths and weaknesses, and how impact could be improved. I believe that strongly. But I don't think you only need accountability of the rich and complacent north to the south, or of men to women. I think you need accountability everywhere. I've, encountered parliamentarians in developing countries who are doing okay, and they're part of an elite. And they never go to our constituency because that's not really where they're going to raise the money to win the next election from. Everywhere, those in public office need to be held to account. And it's most particularly difficult in weak and fragile states. We haven't talked about how you manage increasing access to clean water in Sudan at the moment, shall we say. But, ultimately, if people are making it impossible through politics and conflict to deliver basic services, accountability is necessary. So it's a matter of accountability of those who are decision makers, policy makers and decision makers, to the people on whose behalf they purport to be making decisions.
I just want to follow up quickly. It's not all doom and gloom, because my siblings are Gen Z, and I told them the scary stat that 11 pairs of jeans use as much water as you drink in 10 years.
Yeah.
And they've all started voting with their wallet, or whatever the phrase is. They now are very careful about what fashion they buy. They buy from charity stores. The way people are buying, definitely with Gen Z, is changing. The thought around it is changing, and they care. Yeah. And when I told them that fact, they've changed how they purchase, what they think about. So I do think that knowledge sharing and telling people this information will change slowly over time.
Just a little comment. That's really important. And people sort of voting with their legs, if I can put it like that, is really important. In my sort of student generation, long, long ago, I was very much involved with campaigning in solidarity with the Southern African liberation movements. Public choice campaigns. There was a campaign to get people to boycott the Midland Bank, as was then, now HSBC, and Barclays Bank, because of the profits they were deriving from the apartheid system. There were boycotts of South African grown fruit and wine. So citizen campaigns, I think, can make a difference, both as a statement that change is necessary and actually, through the economic power of people. So, I'm strongly agree with that point.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a question over there.
Hi, okay. My name is Alicia Ofori from Cranfield University. I had quite a number of comments concerning the discussion we've had today, but I just want to pick on the point we made about gender. And gender has been mainstreamed in quite a number of sectors. My sector is in water and its intersection with the extractive industry and other sectors as well. I think we should start talking about intersectionality also when we speak about gender. And we also have to pay attention to the narratives and the mainstream narratives about women and girls in communities. There's been quite a number of research in communities where we realize that it's not all women who are disempowered. There are quite a number of powerful women who have control over water resources and who determines who is able to access that. There are boys who are also disempowered. There are disabled people. There are women, perimenopausal women. So there are quite a number of categories and class and caste that determines people's access to water and sanitation. And I think we should start the discussion from there, instead of saying that this percentage of women worldwide do not have access to water. We should start unpacking that data. And that comes back to data that we say concerning global challenges, concerning the SDGs as well. Research now is showing that the SDGs and the reporting and monitoring of it is being used by countries as a form of gaining political legitimacy within the international community. So the data that is being presented does not actually reflect what's happening in those countries, those districts, but they just have to do it just for reporting's sake. We should start looking into that and unpacking all those narratives as well. I think that's when we can actually make progress in attaining water and sanitation hygiene in the next decade. Thank you.
Okay, that's a pretty good point to make. Do we have any reply? If not, we have questions. Okay, thank you.
I was just thinking it'd be really nice to hear the panel's views on degrowth. There was recently a green growth conference in Europe where they talked about completely different systems, so moving away from a capitalist model, changing society, changing how our economy works. So just some reflections from the panel on that.
Model?
I can start. I mean, we looked at that a bit. In a sense, I mean, not from the, I think the degrowth is the principle coming from, economy, isn't it? And how we develop. What is really, I guess if we just think about the fundamental problem, the fundamental problem is the way how we are developing is very resources intensive. So we take lots of resources and we pollute a lot. So this is the cycle that we are currently operating in. There is a global aspect, so lots of resources come from one country, produce somewhere, use somewhere. There's a big footprint from water, energy, and so on in the way how we consume. Access to food and what we eat, how we eat, is very also resources intensive and so on. So there is a lot of that kind of what is wrong in a sense the way how the world is currently designed. We have designed it without thinking, how, or maybe I should kind of step back. We knew, and there was an evidence. So if you ever look at the report that was published in 1978, I believe it's called Limits to Growth. It is a work that has been done by the MIT team and the System Dynamics group, who showed that if you look at the links between the key sectors in the economy, that with the current use, that was for the non-renewable resources, the world will collapse 2050 or something like that, because we'll just run out of any resources and the pollution will be huge. And I think and at that time, that report was completely discouraged because it's a kind of simplistic model. It doesn't represent things realistically, but they do revisions of that report periodically, and we are absolutely on the trajectory what the model has predicted. So the degrowth, I think, is an interesting concept. I think what needs to happen with the degrowth is that the change in the economic setup and the way how we develop needs to go hand in hand with the thinking about the skills and the types of jobs and what people do, because if you make lots of industries redundant, if you reduce consumption, if you reduce production, lots of people will stay out of their jobs. So there is an issue of the reskilling, I think, what needs to happen. But I think coming back to water, which isn't it what we are interested in, one also nice way and possible way to think about it is in a context of targets. Because what we are currently not doing is to say what is our water environment that we want to have, and then work within those limits. If we would do that, I think carbon neutrality is trying to kind of put something around that. We have the regulations say on the water quality, but what we are saying is this is what the quality should be, and if it's not, we pay the fine, isn't it? This is current way of thinking. And we do impose development, infrastructure, and so on, and then, see what's the impact, and then put the options to offset that impact. While you can think about the things and say, this is my water quality that I want to be, I'll stress the system as much as I can to maintain that water quality, and that will define the limit of my development, which is something that probably should be done. So it's definitely needed. I think the implementation is quite challenging.
Thank you, Anna. Henry,
I apologise. I have a meeting at 3 o'clock, which was booked before you booked me here, and I need to jump on my bike and get there. But thank you for a really stimulating day, and I'm sorry I can't be with you for the last 20 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry, can I just confirm? I did want to ask a question to you directly. In your ICANN review, you said £200 million a year on WaSH projects, and 50% of them weren't working 3 to 5 years later. So that's £100 million a year that's been spent on projects which have lasted 3 years over, what, a 10-year period?
Broadly speaking, what you've drawn from our earlier report, our 2016 report, was right. So, which led the government to say we mustn't keep doing what we are doing.
But it's just stopped doing stuff, hasn't it?
I'm sorry?
It's just stopped doing stuff. It hasn't done anything new.
It has just stopped doing stuff because when its new programs were coming on stream, it put a moratorium on new programs. The ray of hope that is there, which in our latest review, the officials we talked to, who can't make public announcements, but that's the value of ICAI. We get to see classified material, which isn't in the public domain. They have a whole raft of new programming, as you know, under the new model, partnerships with governments and authorities in the south, which is ready to go. When the spending review, the government organises its spending plans, usually organises its spending plans in 3-year cycles, and it's putting together a development package of 3-year spending. So at the moment, you're absolutely right. They stopped this 200 million a year program because it had this huge failure, lack of sustainability problem. It has proposed a new approach, and we the public, and part of the public in this regard too, are waiting for them to announce what the shape of the new programming will be.
And are you confident that will have a better than 50% success rate?
No, because we as ICAI evaluate the impact of programming that has already taken place. We're not in a position, through our work, to advise on what programming will work. Although we do, if you look at our latest paper published last year, we raise a number of things we call lines of inquiry, which are questions that we haven't resolved, but which need to be resolved by academics, think tanks, NGOs, the government, the Parliamentary International Development Committee. So, but the way you illustrate where we stand in terms of UK aid for WaSH at the moment is right. It's not my job as a public servant to use words like shambolic, but it's my job to put information in the public domain for people like you to reach judgments about what's working, what isn't within the aid program. And I leave it to you.
Thanks so much for the... We still have our panelists will remain in the seat and then have further questions if you may have. Oh yeah, Mala, you want to mention something, please?
I just wanted to go back to the issue of degrowth for a moment, because that's a very interesting one, and I think Anna rightly pointed out that it is also inextricably linked. That you can't look at water in isolation. So if you look at saline intrusion in places like Bangladesh, where I do some work, and the extent to which the whole of the community in the Bay of Bengal region is affected, daily life is affected, that isn't going to be resolved by a limited focus on water. But that's got to take a much more holistic view of all of the root causes of this climate crisis, of which this capitalist, exploitative, extractive way of doing things is, I think, coming to an end. Either we end it or we get ended, because, you can't say things like, we are facing existential risks, but without actually understanding the gravity of what that means, especially as we sit here as scientists and academics saying those things. So there is literally no way out that I can see beyond degrowth. And I have read quite a lot on the donut model, which is proposed by an Oxford colleague. I don't know her, but maybe some of you do in this room, Kate Raworth's model. And it's a very plausible model. And Anna's also right about what about the people who will be thrown out of work. But the Grantham Institute here has written about things like just transition movements. So we don't need to be in that position where when we replaced pony carts with cars, I mean, I've often wondered what happened to all those people. Did they all become drivers? Or how did it work? Or when industry shut, we look at our mining towns. It's a public health issue. And I think there are ways by which we can learn from the past and ensure that people aren't neglected and everybody's taken along this. But I think whole cities like Amsterdam are experimenting, as I understand it, with this donut model and looking to see how it fits with our current ways of doing things. It might seem a little clumsy, but they're making a start, and I long for us in Britain to do something similarly. And perhaps, it's up to all of you influential academics to speak out about this and see if there are districts, boroughs that might go down that route and start looking at studying the implications of it and doing some rapid appraisals, because we might be in a position where these movements catch on.
Thank you for your comments. Any other questions? Yeah?
Just hang on a moment, please, because there's people online and they won't be able to hear.
I suppose I had a question more about how we engage the public with this, because particularly if we improve monitoring, which definitely needs to be done for the industrial and academic side, if those figures are then released to the public, which they have a right to that information, I think that we risk causing a lot of panic. Like, there are already so many people who don't trust drinking water, and they swear they never touch it, they drink nothing but bottled water. And this is already in the UK, where we have really good water regulations. Admittedly, they fall over a little bit sometimes, but for the most part, it's really good. So how do we balance this sharing of information carefully?
It's an interesting question. I actually know people that only use bottled water for their shower, just to go really extreme. Yeah, I have no answer for you. It's a really interesting question that needs a real sit-down discussion point, because we found that actually sewage outfalls haven't necessarily got that much worse in the past 20 years. We just know more about them. So and that it's got more media time. So it's a very tricky one that people, like the recent regulations that are potentially coming in, all this change is because the media has grabbed hold of it and people are now aware of it. It's exactly the same point. We need to be very careful with giving the information in the right way and not letting the media take hold of it and make it just a headline as opposed to a contextualized piece of information. Very interesting. The data needs to be there, but the behavioral insights need to be correct. It needs to be nudged as opposed to headlines. It needs to be intelligently put across. Again, at schools we should be going to wastewater treatment sites. I personally believe that. Every kid should see where their landfill goes, and they should see how their sewage is treated.
Yeah, I think that reminds me about the Singapore they call New Water. Mm-hmm. The name sounds pretty cool, right? So if you have a good name there, people are not really worried about it. Maybe that's another kind of direction.
I mean, it is a proper social science question. Yeah. I mean, so don't ask an engineer about that. I mean, but we do, I think comes to the point around the interdisciplinary research, which is definitely something that we are starting to do more than we used to. And this is to work with different, interdisciplinary teams. So we have a project where we work with social scientists from University of Oxford and from UCL. So they do two things. They do something which is called community modeling, which is basically where we bring our models with a very simple interface, and then they use that to engage with citizens. which is in a way of filtered information that goes, and it's used to raise awareness, not panic. And then the UCL team also does something which is called participatory system dynamics, where they do lots of workshops with different stakeholders, but they can also do it with citizens, where they take different perspectives and kind of get them to understand the big picture around a certain problem and so on. So I think comes back to maybe the point we can, or at least I mentioned around the information sharing. Definitely has to be carefully, as Claire said, designed to create a certain message, but I think we should be doing it much more.
Okay, any questions? Yep, please.
Just a moment.
Just a moment, yeah.
Hi, I'm a student at Imperial College. I have a question. So, does extended producer responsibility also includes water? If it does, then who is the governing body for extended producer responsibility? And if there is no such inclusion of water in EPR, can we do something for water?
What
I can extended producer responsibility, like we have for waste, like the companies are responsible for the waste they produce. So, like in developed countries has industries in developing country, and then like Nescafe has a lot of packaged material, so they are responsible for their waste. Are they also responsible for water as a prime agenda, or it's just they talk about under extended producer responsibility only waste, not water?
Yeah, I think it's the what they call it, the ESG, isn't it? It's a corporate sustainability. I think you're talking about the corporate sustainability. I think the way how it's tried to be addressed is through the ESG, which is the environmental sustainability governance criteria. And I think the investment community is looking at those criteria when they are investing in a certain company. How the ESG assessment is done, I don't know. So this is a question around that. Should there be a corporate responsibility? Yes, definitely. I mean, they do use lots of resources and so on. But I think it's the part of the bigger picture generally around the responsibility, because you can say, what is our responsibility for using 160 liters per day per person? So responsibility has to be shared, but I think definitely there is something around, and I think this is discussion here around water companies, the profit they make versus the investments they make. So the companies that make huge profits based on the environmentally unsustainable practices definitely should have their share of responsibility.
Okay, we probably can have 1, 2 more questions. Okay, just one, yeah. Yeah, just one. Just wait. Yeah, last one. Okay.
When you spoke about having like best practices for WaSH in specific context, just as you have in the medical field. When you look at how complex water and sanitation governance is, do you think this can work practically, knowing that political economic contexts keep changing, situations keep changing, culture is dynamic, with all those aspects taken into consideration? Do you think that same practice can be replicated in the WaSH sector?
Thank you. Actually, that's it's a really interesting question. The short answer is I don't know. I don't know whether it will, but we should jolly well try it, because our current methodologies and our current activities are so wasteful. I had to do extensive reading before I discovered that not a single ounce of, or whatever the measure of hydrogen is, has been produced without some massive amounts of carbon emissions, yeah? So shouldn't the public know that? If they're all rooting for hydrogen as the kind of thing that's going to save us all, shouldn't they know that, and up front? And I would love to see, in the context of an African country or an Asian subcontinent country or a district or anywhere, where they say, here's a problem, and this department, this distinguished department, works with them and thinks about all of those calculations, brings in the indigenous knowledge in that area. So it's not just about, doing things the way we've always done it, but doing it in a different kind of way, using the participatory vulnerability assessments. WaTrade does it a lot, using those kind of social science techniques, and coming up with a solution where the entire pathway of how that decision has been arrived, that in that context this is the best solution, is transparent and put up as a case study. So it may not be as neat as nice saying, let's look at aspirin. Oh, it does cure headaches, so let's just put that on our website. It may not be that tidy, but wouldn't that at least make a start, bringing in the key players? And by the way, with all due respect, I slightly beg to differ, and I think women should still be the major contributors to that discussion. Not because I don't, I don't concern myself with the others, with disability and the highly vulnerable other communities. But if we get it right for this 50% of the population and bring them in, given the very specific particular problems they have and the challenges they face, then I think we might get it right for the rest. So I think we need to give it a try.
Thank you, Mala. I really like all audience questions, and it's good to have a good speaker from the United States and the States. Francis is going to talk about WaSH. It's a WaSH program. It's been doing over a decade. He might have some answer for us for our discussion today. So now we're going to close the sections, and thank you for the panelists, all the answer and questions. And we have a break, and we have coffee outside, then we enjoy it. Thank you.
Henry, for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.